Consolidating services is one way communities can work together to cut costs and identify savings. A group of community and business leaders have a plan to consolidate Grand Rapids services with neighboring cities. It's called the One Kent Proposal because it would also include consolidation of county services. How would it work? What are the benefits and drawbacks? And who loses or gains power? We discuss on Newsmakers. And thank you for joining us on Newsmakers. On the panel, welcome back. Carol Valade, Grand Rapids Business Journal, and a new face, Jim Harger. He's kind of the new political reporter taking over for Jeff Cranston from the Grand Rapids Press. Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you back.
Thank you.
And we also have Sandy Frost Parrish, who is the chair of the Kent County Board of Commissioners. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Niall Deems, who is on the One Kent Coalition. You're the spokesman.
I sometimes speak about it. Thank you for having me.
And there are plenty of voices on that coalition, business leaders and you have some government officials on that?
We have some ex-government officials.
You're
nobody who's currently involved in either an administrative position, an employee position, or elected position.
A little history, if you could. This has been in the works for over a year, and I know the commissioners weren't happy because you really didn't know what was going on when this was revealed. But starting out with the history of this, how did the group come together? And if you could give us a few names and how this all played out.
Well, I think the group comes together because a number of occasions in the past history of the city, some local leaders have said this would be a good idea to study, to sort out what we might do to work on this area as a regional city, a bigger, broader base to project ourselves. And so that call has come from a number of the mayors of the city of Grand Rapids and county commissioners over the last several decades. Actually, the first time we were informed that one of these occurred, I think it was back in the 60s. Someone first came up with this idea. Anyhow, it's been raised more recently, and with those calls has often been a suggestion that the local business community should be involved in this issue. The private sector should help move this forward to get it in front of people. And I think that's what led to a couple of the people that have been involved in the civic affairs of the city in the past, as Grand Rapids has done well with its citizens getting involved in their philanthropy. And as I understand it, I think it was a conversation perhaps between Peter Wege and Mike Chandernova, or some sequence of that, and they brought in a few of the other people that have been involved in these kinds of things, Dick DeVos, K.P. Walters, David Fry, and said, well, let's take a look at this. Is this a good type of idea? What should be? I think Kirk Kimball then came on board to assist them. And so that's how it sort of got formed. Let's look at this as the idea of trying to have some kind of regional city consolidated thing, more collaborations. Is this a good idea? What should we do? And then they also asked a consultant from Louisville, Kentucky, that have been involved in their consolidation to assist them with looking at this, studying it, and he did that, ran a survey for them, which found a considerable amount of interest in the subject in the area. And so that's what sort of set that study group forward, looking at this. And then over time, they slowly brought in a few more people, and so it became a group of more like 15 to 20 people looking around for any information, trying to bring it together to get a cohesive thought, studying the concept.
And then you had a study completed and you brought it before the Board of Commissioners, and
well, what we were doing is we were studying this process, and we had talked to a number of local politicians and at the state level about it. For example, at the state level, to see if this is the type of thing the legislature and the governor's office would entertain. And at the local level, let them know that we were looking at it. And then they said, well, why don't you come make a presentation to tell us what you got? I don't think at that point in time, it was about February of this year, we were really quite through trying to have a cohesive, proposal put together. But we had a fair amount of information, and so the answer was fine, sure. And then I think the first time we presented that in some fashion was to the County Board of Commissioners. It was in February.
How'd that work out?
Well,
I know it was a surprise.
Well, let me talk first about just the background the county has with consolidation, if I may. The interest in consolidation activities really goes back a long ways, and Al said even maybe back as far as the 60s. Vern Ehlers, when he was chair of the county commission in 1981, had a commission that was put together. That commission, one of the resulting things of that commission was the Kent District Library System. So there were some really good things in terms of consolidation of services that came out of that. The county continues to be very interested in that, and we've been pushing since probably 2006 on our legislative agenda for some sort of consolidation of services enabling legislation at the state, which thankfully just passed in June through the Senate that Mark Jansen has been championing for us. So that's going to give us some greater opportunity to consolidate what we're doing right now. All of those activities were really dovetailing at the same time. I mean, I think there's been interest on a lot of different parties. The city's been interested, county's been long interested in it. My personal interest in it, in fact, goes back to, and I think Carol, I think you and I have talked about this before, goes back to 1975 when I was a high school senior, and we talked about it in urban planning. We focused on Indianapolis. So I've long been interested and involved in these issues. So when the draft legislation came before us in February, we were surprised by the legislation. We weren't surprised by the activity. And we knew all of in 2010 that the activity was going on. I think the surprise was that the legislation came to us. I think as time has gone on since then, we really do want to work, with the One Kent Coalition. I mean, what I would love to see is, let's back up a little bit, get an outside third-party convening group, bring everybody together, articulate the vision that we all sort of agree on, and then figure out how we need to recalibrate in order to move forward. I mean, I would love to see something like they did in Muskegon, where they brought together.
I was going to say, you're really talking about two different things.
We really are.
You're talking about consolidating services with other communities, and you're talking about a complete unigovernment, one city, county government.
Well, I certainly wouldn't rule that out if the data supported it. I think our challenge now is that, especially as we go before the Standard & Poor and Moody's in April, is to make sure that if this legislation does become, passes to the state this fall, that there's some due diligence has been done to determine the cost. And
Are
who's
you
going to pay for it.
suggesting that legislation from One Kent would pass this fall?
Well, potentially it could go, if it's introduced into the House this fall, and if it were passed, to be on the ballot for 2012.
Are you that close, Niall?
I don't know. The draft of the bill that we gave, as I said, we really weren't quite through making it a coherent proposal when we spoke to the county in February. We still haven't finished that. We've gone a couple drafts further. The draft we have right now, we sent out to, I think, just all the local units of government in the county in early June. Said, here's what we have right now. We're happy to take any comments anybody has on this. So we would still hope to finish that in a form that can go to the legislature this year and to try and get them to pass it. We think there is a receptive mood in the legislature and the governor's office to look at something like this in this legislature.
Do you have any sponsors for this
No,
legislation?
we have not turned in a draft of the legislation to any legislators. We don't have any sponsors lined up. We aren't to that point
But you did talk to Governor Snyder before his election last year in terms of how he was putting, the whole restructuring of government together. I thought there were members of One Kent who had spoken with
Well, there might have
Snyder.
been, because perhaps they had. I can't tell you that. I can tell you after the election, we did approach some number of the legislators that had been elected, and we spoke with Lieutenant Governor Calley to ask about their potential receptiveness to something like this, if we could get it prepared and presented to them. And they said, it's an interesting idea, get something drafted and give it to us to look at.
Well, I think our challenge with all of this really is that I don't think it makes sense to pass legislation without doing the due diligence first. Passing legislation and then doing the details You know, if it turns out that the cost is, you know, really truly outrageous, and we don't know who's going to pay for it, and we don't know whether the legislation addresses the underlying laws that makes consolidation really difficult, you know, we're not any farther ahead on these issues. That's partly why we're kind of calling for an outside convener. And consolidation of services is certainly the thing we're most interested in, but I don't think we'd rule out consolidation of governments if it made sense and the data supported that, and we all agreed to it, and we were all part of that conversation.
Sandy, do you think the legislature can come up with a enabling legislation yet this year that would satisfy the people you're talking to and you're working with on the county level?
Well, and as I think everybody knows, that we've appointed a committee to do the due diligence on the legislation itself. That committee, I just want to be really clear, that committee is not charged with coming up with a new proposal. It's really charged with looking at this legislation so that we can answer the questions not only amongst ourselves, but to our citizens and to those that rate us. You know.
So are you going to be done with your work in time for the legislature to pass and adopt this?
It is very difficult, and it's going to be rough sledding, and it's going to take some time. So we're planning, that committee's planning on having its work done by February.
Your due diligence is primarily related to the financial considerations and taxing authorities. Is that correct?
That's certainly a big part of it. How much is it going to cost? Who's going to pay for it? How does it impact the county's AAA
Does
bond
the city
rating?
income tax get spread throughout the county?
Right, all those issues. But we're also looking at the legislative issues, because there's, you know, one of the things that I think that citizens would like to see in consolidation is a reduction in the number of elected officials, and this doesn't do that necessarily. And so we're looking at all of those things as well, the legislative pieces parts, to see if they make sense from a governance point of view as well.
Niall, is not a part of this also to create a larger economic area, an area that pops up on the screens of other businesses in terms of economic development and business retention recruitment? Is that not a reason, or one of the reasons to consider this as well?
Yes, we think that's a very important reason. We think in looking at that, how that played and to what extent it was successful in helping the cities we looked at that we thought were similar in size that had this type of consolidation. There's about 40 of them around the country, and we thought the ones that were the closest blend to what we're talking about were Indianapolis, Louisville, Kentucky, Nashville, Tennessee, and Jacksonville, Florida. And in each of those instances, these cities and their economic development had a huge boost in vibrancy and development after their consolidation, as well as some of the other things that we think this would help, the efficiencies of scale of the government and restoring services.
And we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll let Sandy respond to that in just 1 minute. Back with more West Michigan. I'll let Sandy let you pick up where Niall had just left off with the whole idea of regional development and prosperity.
Right. You know, regional development and prosperity is we're very interested in that as well. We have some technical questions about that whole aspect of it. In other words, if the city merges with the county of Kent, because of state law, does that mean we have a county or a city with 188,000? How does that gain population? And according to our state laws, we're not sure that it does exactly what they're hoping it does. But you know, certainly we want to see regional cooperation and regional economic development as well. And we really feel, and I know we sound like we're harping all the time on our AAA credit rating, but we do think that is one of the things when people are out there, you know, pushing our community and promoting our community, that one of the things that we can say is we're an economic island in the state of Michigan, and part of that has to do with how well the county has been managed. And it saves about $1 million a year in our taxes. which may, in and of itself, it may not seem significant in the overall pie, but that we are so well managed is definitely a selling point to anyone selling Grand Rapids or the County of Kent.
Niall, does One Kent Coalition have an answer to all of Sandy's questions?
We think the county is well managed and it has a nice AAA bond rating. And in these 4 cities that we studied, I can tell you that 3 of them, I think all 4, their bond ratings went up after the consolidation.
Why doesn't the statistical market area count for as much? I mean, if you're looking at, the federal statistical market area, and that's showing the same population, how would creating a unit government make any difference? I guess maybe somewhat to what you were saying about the population. The population is the population. So I'm not sure what the difference would be now, whether this creates a better region for economic development than the SMSA, or?
Well, on that issue, what you're doing is you're looking at your visibility. You know, how are you presenting yourself? Are you a city of 187,000 or are you a city of 602,000? And our proposal is to consolidate the 2 functioning governments. And it'll be a county government and a city government. It'll have some name, something like the metropolitan area, or the metropolitan government of the city of Grand Rapids and Kent County, or something like that. And but now,
so
as
this presumably includes the cities of Kentwood and Wyoming, and
well,
it's
it
all one.
does in terms of they're in the county. It's just like in Indianapolis. In fact, each of these different cities that had a Unigov, they didn't. The townships and other cities that were there didn't go away and disappear. They still stayed there. They still had their population, but
I think that was true of Louisville, but not true of Indianapolis. Indianapolis actually did bring down their borders through most of the county. And so when they counted their population, the whole population was one except for Speedway and some of the other places that didn't merge in. And I think in this case, if it's just the city and just the county, at least for me, I'm not really sure how you count in the rest of the county without actually merging the municipalities. To me, if you were going to merge the municipalities, the 6 cities, or all 35 units of government, then you could say that it's a city of 300 or 602,000. But I think that's really going to be determined by state law. I don't think it's necessarily going to be determined between you and I here.
No, it isn't. It's state and federal law. But
yeah.
In talking to both Indianapolis and Louisville, it worked that way.
In order for this to happen, there has to be enabling legislation. I asked you before if you have a sponsor. At this point, you don't. Several state legislators from this area have disavowed themselves, disassociated themselves with the One Kent Coalition proposal. Assuming you find sponsors in the legislature, but you don't have any local legislatures as co-sponsors, how difficult is that going to be to sell to voters?
Well, I think we're going to have local legislators as some of the sponsors. So I don't think it's difficult that way. And there were a couple legislators who, back whenever, very promptly just accused this of being some things and called it some names and issued a press release and, declared it was evil.
I think the reality...
I was going to say there are 2 different viewpoints in terms of, how much support there might be for it. And, I'd like to get to that point as well. Niall, you've said that you've been encouraged and you get a lot of positive comment no matter where you go, particularly from businesses. But businesses are telling probably our news organizations they prefer it to be local, and the less bureaucracy, the better. You're seeing pushback from the other communities in the county.
The resolution that was passed by all 21 townships, really said to One Kent Coalition.
That resolution was?
It was a resolution that was passed at each one of the 21 townships. Each passed this resolution. It didn't say One Kent Coalition go away. What it said was One Kent Coalition, please slow down. There is a lot of due diligence to do here. We want to be part of the conversation. And we would like everybody, again, to be part of that larger vision and have some determination and discussion together about what the future is going to look like. And really, I think that's what we're saying as well, is that we want to be a part of whatever the solution is to whatever the articulated vision is. We just don't want everything running out ahead of itself before we've really been through everything in a thoughtful way. And I think what I hear consistently is, it all sounds very good in theory, but the devil is in the details. And we're appreciative that the county is at least sort of standing there and saying, we need to do the due diligence on this and make sure we're doing it the right way, and make sure we're doing it in the right time frame, and make sure everybody's engaged. And that's really what we're trying very hard to get that message out there. And we're trying very hard working with our local partners to get everybody sort of on that same page. And my impression is everybody is on that page. And so the question is how do we move forward, and can we move forward in a way that makes sense with one can, in a way that everyone can agree to? And that's all we're really trying to say.
Is that foot dragging, Niall?
Is that foot dragging by the county and the townships?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, it's foot dragging. It's stating their view that they think it's going too fast. You have to remember the timetable that at least we've suggested to people we think is the right timetable is to hopefully get the legislature to consider this and pass it yet this year. It's 2011. We think it would be good to have it on the ballot in 2012 when you have a presidential election, because the last presidential election brought out 72% of the voters. We think it should be before the voters.
All county voters.
of all county voters, all county voters. And we think it should be on the ballot when you get the largest vote. The last gubernatorial election brought out 47% of the voters, 50% more in a presidential election. We think something like this should be out there when the largest group of people are voting. Also, even if it passes in 2012, our idea doesn't even, as you go through the process, wouldn't even start until January 2014. So this is kind of a classic sequence here. The government world moves slowly. And, we're accused of over-rushing things that wouldn't start for 2.5 years. There's a number of people, obviously, in the local governments that want it to be on a longer time frame.
But what if at the end of the day, the due diligence is done and it doesn't make sense? That the numbers don't make sense. The systems alone and I don't want to drill down into the costs, because I know that we'll disagree on what we think the costs are going to be. But, if it's going to cost $20 million to just merge our IT departments, then you have to step back and think, okay, is that worth the investment? It probably is. But who's going to pay for it, and how long is it going to take? And I don't think it's foot dragging. I really don't think it's foot dragging. We're not trying to maintain the status quo. There's no money. There is no money. The revenue is going backwards in every way, in all kinds of different ways, in interest and property taxes in 100 different ways.
Which makes the bond rating all the more important.
Which makes the bond rating all the more important.
Do you suggest, Niall, that there's no need for that sort of detail in what might be proposed through the state, through state legislation?
Well, no, the state legislation, the Enabling Act, wouldn't have all that detail in it anyway. If you go look at any enabling acts, they'll tell a government you can have a library. It doesn't tell you how to run your library, or do you have a library commission, do you have a library tax, do you do what? It says you can have a library.
Senate Bill 8 that passed has a lot of detail in it. The Municipal Partners Act that passed has a lot of detail in it. It is not simply, you shall merge.
Well, I think you can draft a piece of legislation that has, all the detail you want. I think then you're over-detailing it. You don't have any flexibility for the government to operate. We've went through, the legislation we're proposing has essentially the same amount of detail as the legislation that has passed in Kentucky in terms of that amount of detail. And they have two very successful consolidations, Louisville and Lexington.
I'm also curious as to why you wouldn't step up to this with a process like has just occurred in Muskegon County, the city, the county, and several of the individual units of government, especially and specifically looking at merged services. That doesn't go far enough?
Well, we don't think it goes far enough. There's a lot of collaborations in this area, almost 100 of them, and they haven't staved off the monetary problems.
We'll have to end it there. When should I pencil in the next meeting? Because I think this is going to go on for a while.
It probably will.
November, December?
I don't care.
When should we do? You don't care?
No, I mean, find a
Back at
favorite date to
Halloween.
come back, because it'll be a couple stages down
Right.
the road and can be recycled. And Jim and Carol will dream up really nitpicky questions to come
Well,
out.
I don't know what they do with that.
I think we'd be very appreciative of the opportunity to come back.
That's
All
fine.
right.
Absolutely.
That's fine.
Let's end it there. Carol Valet, Grand Rapids
you,
Business
Patrick.
Journal, thank you. Jim Harger from the Grand Rapids Press, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sandy Frost Parrish, thank you for being here.
Thank
And
you very
Niall
much.
Deems, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Played nice right up until the end there. And thank you for joining us this week. We'll see you next week on West Michigan Week.